Howie Roseman yet again looks like a genius across NFL circles for a lot of reasons, but we'll tell you why today right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome into this Thursday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by Gino Camilleri. You can also find our work over at Bleacher Report on today's edition of Locked On Eagles. The Eagles yet again look like a very smart football team after another wide receiver extension. Going to get into that, plus OTA takeaways, another practice done at the NovaCare complex, and First Thought rolls on. Thanks again for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. It's been a great offseason for Howie Roseman, Gino. Like, there's been some offseasons he's been dragged, and there's been some ones he's been hyped up. Sometimes either way, justifiably so, sometimes not so much. And I think yet again today, Howie looked like a genius after the Miami Dolphins extended Jaylen Waddle to a huge extension. And he looks smart because, yes, is he paying two receivers top 10 money on his own right? Of course. But when you look at specifically the DeVonta Smith contract, 3 years, $75 million, 51 of which is guaranteed, compared to Jaylen Waddle, who just got 3 years, $84.75 million, $75 million guaranteed. So he got $24 million more guaranteed and another $9 million annually more than DeVonta, when I think DeVonta might be a better player. It just, again, shows how being proactive, even if sometimes you might be a little bit too early on a player, I think it's always the right strategy. And he looks smart again because DeVonta suddenly looks severely underpaid. I'd almost demand a restructure if I was six.
I quite literally laughed out loud at your tweet when you said that DeVonta Smith should demand a restructure because you're correct, man. There's no planet. Yes, Jaylen Waddle is a really, really good football player. He's a great player. And I think Miami's smart for paying two very good wide receivers, because in this discussion, there are other teams that are still holding their hands behind their back and not paying these guys, and Cincinnati as well. And you look at DeVonta Smith getting basically an entire year's less of guaranteed money in his contract than Jaylen Waddle. 24 is just a year under the APY of 25 that DeVonta is getting per year. But like you said, Lou, Howie Roseman, he's always going to be first to the table, and he is not scared to throw it all into the middle and say, let's ride. Because he understands that there's other big ballers at this table too, man. There are other wide receivers that are going to want their money. Justin Jefferson still hasn't been paid yet. Jamar Chase, CD Lamb, and DeVonta Smith at this point, even A.J. Brown at this point, Lou, those contracts are going to be bargains in this NFL. That money that they have already shelled out, Howie Roseman, hats off to you, because he knew what this market was going to be. He was proactive, and it's not just at wide receiver. It's at the offensive line, which he has done time and time and time again. Go back to that regular season where he paid Josh Sweat and Jordan Mailata and Avonte Maddox, extended that entire 2018 class. He is not scared to be the first one to the store and say, I'm going to buy everything in here so everybody else can't.
And he literally was the first one, Gino, because the DeVonta contract is what set up then Nico Collins getting paid, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Philadelphia paid another receiver this year, Jaylen Waddle. It was him being a leader instead of a follower and setting the market. And that was so big. And again, sometimes it can backfire if you pay a player too early, i.e. Carson Wentz, but I'd rather take that chance and then have an elite player like Jalen Hurts, for instance, too, on a contract that looks like a bargain than being far too late and you're paying a player like now CD Lamb so much more money than you probably would have had to if you just paid him a little bit earlier. Like the Dallas Cowboys, I don't know what the reservations are about CD Lamb, what that guy's got to prove to pay him, or the Cincinnati Bengals not paying either Jamar Chase or T. Higgins. But I'm really glad Philadelphia is not in that boat where they're saying not only are we going to pay one guy early, but we're going to pay the other one too, when his contract's not even close to being up like DeVonta's will be.
I think there are two really important points to walk away from this. Number one, Howie Roseman is no dumb, and he understands that if you have elite players, you pay them elite money. And 2, time is a flat circle, because you could go back to the year 20. When did Carson Wentz get extended? Was he extended in 2018?
Season after 2018, the offseason after 2018, yeah.
So going into 2019, I remember you and I sitting in the WGR studio in Buffalo having the discussion that with the salary cap going up, with the TV deals going up, and look at all these streaming wars that are going on for NFL games. If you don't think that's going to continue, the cap is only going to go up. So you pay these guys early, which was the discussion we had on Carson Wentz back then. And even though he failed out under his own doing, at the time, the contract made a ton of sense, because if you just look at it in a vacuum, you paid a quarterback at the top of his game a record-setting deal that was instantly broken within a few days. And then all of a sudden, the market just kind of corrects itself back to what it always was going to be, and it was going to be greater than the year before. And Howie Roseman knows that this thing is never going to go down, that teams have to pay very good football players, and that if you are a smart general manager, you pay those guys ahead of time. Because why are you waiting for the PS5 to hit the streets and let the open bidding war happen when you got a guy on the side who's like, yeah, we could get this deal done and you don't even have to go and bid against everybody else? That's kind of what Howie Roseman does. He kind of walks up to the poker table, and he looks at everybody else's stack and he says, okay, I see what you're doing. He's going to one up everybody at the table, go all in, see if everybody else wants to play along. And then when they do want to play along, it's too late, because Howie Roseman already made his money and he's already in his bag right now. Because if you're looking at it through an investment lens, he's already made money in terms of extending these guys. He's already ahead of the curve. If he had to wait and now pay them on top of this deal, what are you looking at for DeVonta Smith? What are you looking at for AJ Brown? You're looking at an additional probably 20 million between the two guys.
And that's huge, Gino, when you paid so many other players on offense contract extensions as well. Like, that money you saved by getting these deal dones early allowed you to also pay Landon Dickerson.
Was that right? The deal's done early. You said that was funny. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're good. And then Jordan Mailata got paid too. And, you were able to go out there and sign Saquon Barkley and so many other players in free agency and continue to be aggressive. I think another takeaway too is that DeVonta Smith is one of the most selfless players that's ever come through Philadelphia. Like, he had every right to wait, Gino. He had every right to say, I'm in an offense that I'm not getting as many targets. Like, I want to try to maximize my value as much as possible. There were so many routes that he could have taken, and instead he took the team-friendly deal early. And, it's still a really good contract, right? You're making, right now, it's the 7th or 8th most annually at $25 million a year, and you're getting 51 guaranteed. Like, that's still a great contract. But for DeVonta Smith, this is a player that on a lot of other teams could be an elite true wide receiver one. And only by circumstance of AJ Brown being in Philadelphia is he getting paid not like a top 5 receiver and not getting top 5 target shares. And that, to me, again, just shows how selfless he is.
And he's no dummy, too. I mean, he understands that he has performed in big moments, too, where if we're going to make the argument, and you're splitting hairs here between him and Jaylen Waddle, the one thing that Waddle hasn't had is one of these dominant playoff performances. And
DeVonta's had
Smith,
3 years of playoff
he's done it every single time. We talk about that he's the most consistent guy for you in those occasions. So it could be completely warranted that he would want to get more than his cohort from Alabama and Jaylen Waddle. But you're right, man. What a selfless move. He knew he wanted to be in Philadelphia. That was the sentiment all along. He got his bag. But Howie Roseman on the next deal, he should do him a little bit of a favor and slip him some more guaranteed, because
maybe add a couple more performance bonuses.
He's got to be looking and saying, man, Nico Collins is crazy, good. Don't get me wrong.
And Amon Ra's good too, man. But I'm sorry. I think DeVonta Smith's a better player than a lot of these guys, including someone else. Like T. Higgins is going to get a deal. And I think DeVonta Smith is a much better player.
You think he gets more than DeVonta after this?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, maybe not in Cincinnati, but if it's with another team, I'd say he does. But I don't know. Cincinnati's not paying their guys. Dallas isn't paying theirs. I'm glad the Eagles paid both of theirs and they did it early for sure. So DeVonta Smith's contract makes Howie Roseman look even smarter than some people think he already is. Coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, another OTAs practice in the books at the NovaCare Complex. We've got takeaways coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Looks like it's probably going to be Mavericks Celtics, although Minnesota, it's 3-1. They could still maybe run the table and make history, but likely going to be Dallas and Boston. Get your tickets through Game Time. The NFL schedule is out as well. Pick your road trips to Philadelphia. Road games, Lincoln Financial Field, home games as well through Game Time, where you can save up to 60% buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. Plus, get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you know you're getting a great view on top of the great prices. So again, take the guesswork out of buying NBA and NFL tickets through Game Time. Download Game Time, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms do apply. Create that account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day, got to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Eagles hit the field again today for OTAs, and Gino, some takeaways again, kind of similar opinions, or I should takes from what we had last week in the secondary. You look at yet again, so Darius Slay wasn't there, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Remember, this is voluntary, so Lane Johnson also wasn't practicing, but it was yet another practice where James Bradberry was not there. And if this was, again, like a Lane Johnson or even a Darius Slay, I have no questions about why they aren't there. But James Bradberry, even though he's an older 30-plus-year-old veteran, he should be there. If he wasn't going anywhere after the season he had, he would have no right to not be showing up to practice. For me, him not being there says, I don't know, man, he might be as good as gone.
Doesn't sit well. I wouldn't sit well with anybody in that cornerback room.
If he thought he was going to be in Philadelphia, or they did, he should be on the field fighting for a job.
100%. He should be that guy that's in that leadership.
That's why I think he's
outside
gone.
Of Slay, and maybe he gets it. Maybe he sees the writing on the wall. And
maybe that's what I'm thinking.
The performances from the DBs these last couple practices, it's looking
Looks
like
good.
They're the stars of the show. And of course, we know that early in any offseason, the defense is usually miles ahead of the offense. But you see guys like Isaiah Rodgers gets a big pick 6 in practice today. Yes, it was just 7-on-7s, of course, but he takes that to the house.
The hype train continues for Isaiah, man.
And guys like Sean Stevens, who might be one of the guys who's at the bottom of the roster, is out there getting interceptions off Tanner McKee. And guys, as all the way through the depth chart, are making plays. And the other guy in James Bradberry, the big elephant in the room, just isn't there. So if I'm a position coach, if I'm the defensive coordinator, I'm saying I'm going to go with the guys I can rely on. It's not going to be the guy that's not showing up. It's going to be these young guys. And that's the way that Howie Roseman is structuring this roster now. And you would have to believe that he, as a former player who has been in a similar situation, I would say, to that of the Giants when he exited New York. He was on the downturn after a poor season with a big contract. Was the team going to continue to work him into the rotation? No, they ended up just cutting him. I don't think the Eagles want to go that route. I don't think they want it to be where they can cut James Bradberry and he could potentially walk into a division opponent like he did going from New York to Philadelphia. Could you trade him? Potentially. I mean, you would have to eat that cap going through June 1, but we're a day away from June 1st, so we'll see if any movement happens there. But man, when guys up and down the roster in the defensive backfield are making plays, and Isaiah Rodgers is getting reps, and Eli Ricks is getting more reps, and Keely Ringo is there and he's getting more reps. It's going to be difficult to keep him on the roster regardless of what the contract is. And knowing Howie Roseman, who is a way bigger dead cap hit in cutting Carson Wentz, which might have been his biggest investment ever and his biggest just get out from this garbage kind of contract, he's one to kind of take the trash out if it needs to be taken.
Well, that's why I almost wonder if this is team related, where it's the team saying don't come to practice because we're trading you.
I don't want to speculate on anything like that. I don't know. But it kind of just, if we've watched
why else wouldn't you be there?
The NFL long enough, it kind of makes sense.
If you're James Bradberry and you think you're in Philadelphia this year and you're trying to earn a job, being at voluntary camp to me is very important. And
or is he that clueless that he thinks he has a job and he's just going to show up?
I don't know. And that's why I am speculating that it could be something that it's like related to the team and him working on a deal where they find him a better destination across the league. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But like you mentioned, man, the young players it's only a few practices, but they're looking good. Isaiah Rodgers,
toys they're out of the garbage, man. Like
Keely Ringo, he returned to practice today. He was with the ones, as was Isaiah Rodgers on the outside. Looks like Tyler Hall was the slot corner because Chauncey Gardner-Johnson not there. Gino, the Eagles are slim when it comes to safety bodies right now. And so Avonte Maddox was playing safety. I almost wonder with Sidney Brown injured, if he's not ready to go week one, if they're going to start things off right away with Avonte being like that third safety and they start right off with Cooper DeJean or Isaiah Rodgers or one of those younger guys playing inside, because that so far through the OTAs has been the plan. It's been Maddox as a safety hybrid and Cooper DeJean and some of these other young players like roaming in and out of the slot.
Coop is also taking some outside reps as well. I think he's going to get all opportunities to go and do that. If he steps up to the plate, hey, you hit another home run and getting him and Quinyon Mitchell when you still have Darius Slay to throw out there. And Avonte Maddox was always the question mark on the inside because were you going to keep one of these younger guys off of the field? But at the same time, at safety, do you have depth outside of the big four? And without Sidney Brown, you don't have anybody. You don't have anybody.
And what happens if Reed Blankenship or Chauncey Gardner-Johnson get hurt? Like they're so thin at safety. So one of these corners has to be that guy. And I don't think they want Cooper DeJean to be that player right away. So maybe right away they say, hey, we like DeJean or Rodgers. We want them on the field anyway. Let's put them in the slot and just have Maddox be that third guy. I'm not sure. But the secondary, again, continues to be the fascinating story at NovaCare.
And it's going to be, because of the Fangio element of being able to move these guys around quite literally anywhere that he wants to, i.e. Avonte Maddox. Avonte's smart. I think he is a guy who understands that if he wants to make it on this team after getting cut, coming back for less money, he probably is going to have to play multiple positions. So that's smart of him to say, hey, this team doesn't have as much depth at safety as they do corner, where there are a ton of young guys at corner. There's not as many on the back end at safety. Is Tristan McCollum really going to push things on the back end there? Is Mekhi Gardner somebody that can move back there as well? I don't think those are going to really push the pace. But Avonte Maddox, if he could see the ball coming downhill, tackling wasn't great last year when he had to tackle guys with speed going down the field. But if he could come downhill, see the quarterback's eyes, even at 5'10", he's somebody who has always had that in his arsenal, that he is a solid tackler. And I think it would be smart to have him back there. And if it's a way to keep him on the 53 and he has earned, like we had said, this 12 or 13 DB, one of those spots, heck yeah, man, I'm all for it. And seeing him get first team reps, good for Avonte Maddox, being a smart guy to go back and do that.
Yeah, and then maybe you have Avonte play as one of your deep safeties, and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's the one coming downhill playing.
Yeah, there you go. Just let him play on the ball in the back end.
Exactly. So fascinating to continue to follow the DB battle at camp. Another thing too, Nakobe Dean returned to some team drills today. He was with the first team with Devin White at linebacker. Outside of that, though, not much more to report at OTAs, but I can't wait to watch these defensive backs all summer. All right, guys, coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles, we wrap things up with our first thought on two former Eagles. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Fans, thank you so much for making us your first listen each and every day. It's a Thursday edition of the show, and we're wrapping up our first thought series this week as we continue to say off the top of our head what we think about a former Eagle. And Gino, I've got a couple for you here that it didn't work out so well with the Eagles. And they're both former cornerbacks to stick on the theme of the podcast, and they were from the 2010s era. So one guy is actually kind of timely, considering yesterday Isaiah Rodgers posted a picture of this guy with no context. We learned
what was that all about?
So he's actually his cousin. So that's what that was all about.
Oh, okay.
So here's what I'll add context. First thought of Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie. Isaiah Rodgers yesterday posted a picture of DRC, Nnamdi Asomugha, and Nate Allen. And in my head, I'm like, someone give this guy a history lesson, because this is not like the Eagles version of the Legion of Boom. DRC is Rodgers' cousin. Gino, of course, there's a lot of like instant thoughts about Nnamdi Asomugha or a lot of those dream team players. What's your first thought when it comes to DRC, a guy that really doesn't get talked about a lot from that era?
The fact that Kevin Cobb was used to acquire not only Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie,
but a 2, right?
But a second-round pick as well. Yeah. It might be the most baffling part about that. But I also believe that DRC was underrated. I thought he was a really good number 2 to Asante Samuel.
Unfairly put in with some of like the misses of that team. That was a great trade.
It really was. And when it was him and Asante, you really had a formidable.
Well, it was supposed to be, but then they brought in Nnamdi and DRC got forced into the slot, and he's not
it didn't work.
Slot corner.
No, it didn't work. And I always thought he was a guy who, in his time in Arizona, was one of those guys that always had a role. When he came to Philly, he always had a role, and that
he was an All-Pro with New York,
2.
I think, with the Giants.
It makes sense that he's Isaiah Rodgers' cousin now, and putting that all together. He just doesn't have the Cromartie element to it as well. But the NFL, it's a small world with all of these guys. But it makes a lot more sense why he would include him. But I would say underappreciated or undervalued would be what I would kind of coin.
I would say unfairly criticized. Like, I think he wasn't great in Philly, but he was unfairly joined in with like the disaster of that defense with Juan Castillo, and there was just no plan. Like he was not a slot corner. Then the year later, they did move him to the outside when Asante went to Atlanta, and it was him and Nnamdi. But by that point, this team was just an absolute mess. So I'm with you. I think sometimes people always say it's like that team was terrible because of Juan Castillo, and they brought in, remember, Vince Young, Cullen Jenkins, and Nnamdi, and then DRC. It's like, hold up. I think DRC was just kind of caught in a really bad situation. Gino, another first thought here for another miss at cornerback. And this was a Chip Kelly move, like his first big move as GM. What's your first thought when it comes to Byron Maxwell? Mine was that this didn't even make sense from the start. This guy wasn't a CB1 ever. To give him that contract, looking back, man, that was your first sign Chip was going to be a disaster. And man, did week 1 it start so bad with Julio Jones just taking his lunch money for 3 hours.
There's a lot of things that come to mind with Byron Maxwell.
Miserable.
The Tampa game I was at, where I watched him get diced up by Mike Evans and James Winston as a rookie.
He had some bad games that year.
That was worse than the Julio game, if we're being honest. To see that live, I left that game live. It was terrible. I think he had worse sleeves than Sam Bradford. At least Sam Bradford made sense.
I'm so
Why
glad
did he have sleeves? He's playing quarterback with sleeves. That was
we should have known. We should have known the baggy under sleeves and the long jersey sleeves would have been a problem. No CB1 looks like that.
The guy had about as much drip as a leaky faucet in a Lincoln Financial.
That's what his coverage was.
Yeah, that's exactly what he was, man. He couldn't tackle. He was a cover 3 corner that they tried to make play press man, and it never worked, man. It never worked. And the thing with Byron Maxwell, was he worse than Bradley Fletcher though? Was he the worst guy in that whole tenure? Like, there were some bad cornerbacks in that 2011. Once Asante left, after it was him and DRC, there was that was a solid year. 2011 was good with those two.
Yeah, they were
after that though. Man, it just went downhill so quickly. They made him play in the slot. They put Asomugha outside. Oh, what did they do after Asomugha leaves? Oh, well, they signed another guy who was an off-cover corner to play press man. They just did nothing that worked. They could not evaluate talent. They couldn't put him in the right position to play. And Byron Maxwell was the culmination of not having any semblance of an idea of what a professional football player was. And that was the icing on the cake.
Man. You know, like, Gino, we talk about how bad the receiver run was from like just for a few years, 2018 to not even 2018, because Alshon and Aguilar were still pretty good that year. 2019 and 2020, it was pretty bad. And even 2021 outside of DeVonta Smith. But cornerback for, like you said, man, I don't know. It's 8 years until Darius Slay in 2020. It was even from like 2012 to 2017. It was horrible. I mean, you had Kerry Williams and Bradley Fletcher. At one point, you had your favorite player, Leotis McKelvin, in 2016. That was the worst positional run maybe in Eagles history. I don't know if that's an overstatement. I think it might be correct, though. Like, of just a tenure of time where you just can't get a position right, it might be Eagles corner from 2012 to 2020.
I think you're 100% correct.
At least in Philadelphia. I don't know.
We could do a whole show on how bad that was.
It's a good idea. We can look into that for sure.
There was nobody. Who was opposite Byron Maxwell?
Nolan Carroll.
There you go.
Another horrible player.
Yeah. It was Nolan Carroll, who barely made Miami's team. They signed him to Philly to be a rotational player, and then they re-upped him to be a starter, and he deservingly never should have gotten that contract ever. And that was the story of Eagles cornerbacks.
Yes.
Post Asante Samuel. None of them deserved to play the position in Philadelphia until Darius Slay came back.
Fun times for sure. The Eagles definitely better times at the cornerback position. That's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Guys, yet again, want to let you know about our Locked On Sports Today free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming of Fox Sports and ESPN. We bring you the can't miss analysis, opinions, and news from our local and national experts. You can find it on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.